Hello readers, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson, originally published in 1998. So to begin with an overview, Autobiography of Red is described as a novel in verse. So essentially the novel is written as a collection of poems weaving together to complete a full story. The story follows Geryon, a red-winged monster, on his journey to finding himself, primarily through his relationship with Heracles, a young man who's visiting his grandmother who lives on the same island as Geryon. The story acts as a modern retelling of ancient Greek myth, but in my mind it can be consumed independently of this mythos. Now to go into the plot and pacing. The plot spans a 40-year period of Geryon's life and art. He's working on writing an autobiography accompanied by a collection of photographs he captures along the way. The story is a very quick read, consisting of only about 100 pages, but the pacing can be a bit slow with the story jumping in time, place, and mood between poem or chapter. Now to talk about the characters. So as we mentioned, firstly we have Geryon, who is our protagonist. He is sensitive and artistic and obsessive. He becomes fixated on things like volcanoes, people, etc. Secondly, we have Heracles, who in many ways is a foil to Geryon. Heracles is fiercely independent, glowing, and fearless. He's also the main object of Geryon's attention and attraction. Now to talk about some of the themes that I found throughout the story. So firstly, through the title alone, you may be able to ascertain that color will play some sort of role within the story. So the main color that I picked up on being present throughout the text is red. It's the color of Geryon and his world. It's the color of volcanoes. It's the color of blood, and also the color of love. Red seems to surround Geryon, and in his early life, he even makes an effort to escape from the red to find what other colors the world has to offer. Secondly, in tandem with the previous point, the idea of freedom versus confinement is explored within the story. In a lot of ways, Geryon feels very trapped within his world. He's trapped by his mother, trapped by his brother, trapped by his island, trapped by his appearance. In contrast, Heracles is the embodiment of freedom. He's not afraid to embrace his sexuality. He's not afraid to explore the world. And simply, he's not afraid to live proudly in his truth. In the final sequence of the story, Geryon's describing a photograph in which he's taking flight. He's doing this for others, but more importantly, he's doing it for himself. Throughout the story, Geryon has been repressing his ability to fly, repressing his desires, his thoughts, his body. And when we reach the end of the story, we see for the first time, possibly ever, that he's embracing his power, his strength, his truth, and in that moment, he finds freedom. Now to talk about some of the good and bad elements of the story. So firstly, overall, I think the idea is actually really cool, taking something like poetry, which has a history and association with an art form like the Greco-Roman epic poems. That was a huge part of their society, Homer, and a huge part of their legacy as a culture today. Also, the idea of taking a tragic character and flipping the story to be from their perspective, as well as adjusting the setting to be written from a modern perspective. I did think that while the writing is very creative and descriptive, it at some times can be a little bit overtly stylistic for my personal taste. I would describe this almost as the authors saying a lot of words, but ultimately at sometimes the actual context of what's being said isn't really that much. Additionally, I personally didn't really enjoy the character of Geryon. I didn't find him extremely likable. I understand that he's on a journey of self-discovery and he's trying to find himself, but his total lack of confidence and even sometimes self-awareness was a bit frustrating at times as a reader. I should also mention that I don't love poetry, so I'm a little bit biased here, but at times the poetry aspects of the story made it a little bit boring. The pacing and even the actual events unfolding within the story were sometimes really confusing and a bit hard to follow, mostly due to the overly stylistic writing style of the author. Again, as a novice reader of poetry, I will freely admit that when I was reading this story, I was trying to read it quickly at a normal speed in which you might read any other novel. However, because it is poetry, maybe I should have slowed down a bit more to really digest the events unfolding and truly understand the story before proceeding. However, that was just my experience upon my first time reading through the story. Now to go into my final thoughts. While for me, I personally didn't find this to be an entirely successful work, I fully applaud the author's attempt at trying a seemingly really difficult and also very interesting concept. In terms of a recommendation, I definitely think for poetry fans or Greco-Roman mythology fans, this may be a really great pick for you, but I'm not sure that this has a super wide general audience appeal. I'm super curious to know if anybody has read Autobiography of Red, and if so, what were your thoughts? Did you absolutely love it? I could definitely see some people really loving this book, but again, I don't know if it was exactly my cup of tea. I do, however, really like the idea of modern retellings of mythos and historical fiction and that type of work. Super curious to know if anybody has any other recommendations similar to this type of book. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.